Hope everyone had a great lunch. Thank you so very much. Now to continue with our lunchtime activities, I'd like to introduce, it's my pleasure to introduce our luncheon speaker for today. He is Stephen L. Stockton, who serves as the Director of Civil Works of the U.S. Army? I don't do well when I read things. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. At least I didn't say you worked for the Salvation Army. That would have been worse. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in Washington, D.C. In this position, Steve shares the responsibilities of the Deputy Commanding General for Civil and Emergency Operations. And you actually have that on your business card, probably. Something like that. Okay. Under the policy guidance of the Chief of Engineers and the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, for managing and directing policy development, programming, planning, design, construction, emergency response, operation, and maintenance activities of the Army Civil Works Program, which is a $5 billion annual program of water and related land resources in the United States. Let me just say that Mr. Stockton has a long and distinguished career in his field, and we are fortunate that he has joined us for this important meeting. We all know that the Corps of Engineers touches almost every city and every mayor in this country in some form or fashion, and we'll talk about the good forms and fashions today. So Mr. Stockton, thank you for coming, and we look forward to your remarks. Let's give a welcome to Mr. Stockton.
Thanks, Scott. There's a saying in Washington, the longer your title, the less important you are. So I'm the Director of Civil Works. It's a pleasure to be here with you all, and I've got about 15 minutes of kind of prepared remarks, maybe only 10 minutes, but what I'd like to do is tee up some of the topics, and I understand some of the previous speakers have covered some of these during their presentations, so I'll try to breeze through those areas fairly quickly. Overall, I think America is fundamentally a maritime nation. Ports are the foundation of our country. Navigation is the basis for the Corps Civil Works program. The Corps' navigation role began in 1824 and has led to an unparalleled system of inland and coastal ports. 25,000 miles of commercially navigable channels, 236 lock chambers, 159 ports moving over 1 million tons of commercial cargo per year. I don't think it's a coincidence that 7 of the nation's 10 largest cities are port cities and 27 of the largest 50 cities are port cities. Some call marine transportation the invisible transportation system. This may be true in public perception, especially when compared to roads, rails, and runway. But shipping is the conduit for America's goods to compete in the global marketplace. I believe the conference is a tremendous opportunity to raise awareness of ports' importance as job creators. We see it as this, simply. It's about the economy, jobs, and exports. The Corps' role is to provide navigation channels to move America's commerce. The transportation cost savings of marine transportation are essential in making our exports competitive in a global environment. The President issued the National Exports Initiative in March 2010, which established the goal of doubling exports in 5 years. Exports are increasing compared to 2009. U.S. waterborne exports in 2010 grew by 24% in value and 16% in volume. Our marine infrastructure is challenged with the same age and condition issues being experienced in other transportation modes. For inland mayors, the 50-year design service life for navigation locks has been exceeded more than half of the nation's 236 locks. In response to this, we've developed what we call an infrastructure strategy, and it's really 2 pieces. One piece of that is asset management, which is looking, we have about $250 billion worth of stuff, locks, dams, levees. It was built over the last century. There's no plan in place to recapitalize it. And when we presented the budget to OMB last year, the word that was used over and over again is it's unsustainable because it won't last forever. Typically, we use a 50-year design life, but we can, through recapitalization, we can extend the life to 100 years or more, depending upon reinvesting. We also have to look at how we manage that portfolio and either make decisions on whether to recapitalize, to divest, or to repurpose a lot of the projects. A lot of the purposes for which they were built are no longer relevant, and we need to get some infrastructure out of our portfolio to focus on new needs. The other part of the infrastructure strategy is really looking at alternate financing. Where can we create revenue streams to attract private capital to invest in our navigation infrastructure, and how can we recoup those capital investments? Overall, investment in infrastructure is down. It's an important decision for the nation. A reliable and resilient marine transportation system is essential for a nation to compete in the global marketplace. The U.S. spends only 2.4% of its GDP on transportation and water infrastructure, while Canada and India spend 4%, China spends 9%, and European nations as a whole spend about 5%. While America appropriately focuses on fiscal austerity, this is reflected in the number of channel improvements in study, design, and construction. The Corps' fiscal year 13 budget seeks to funds for 5 deep draft navigation channel improvement studies, 2 projects in design, and 2 projects in construction. What the Corps can do each year for marine infrastructure is dependent on our annual appropriations from Congress. We are focusing the greatest percentage of our maintenance dredging dollars on harbors and waterways that support high volumes of commercial traffic. Congress provides the flexibility in our appropriations to reprogram operations and maintenance funds when required to quickly respond to emergency dredging situations that threaten life and the flow of goods on the waterways. The real game changer in Washington over the last 2 years has been the earmark ban. It's really affected how the appropriations committees do their business. They don't make decisions anymore. We have pretty much a project-specific appropriations bill, and if you can't name projects, it's very difficult to direct dollars based upon congressional preferences as opposed to the president's preferences as proposed in the president's budget. So it's really changed the dynamics with respect to where the money goes, how you make decisions. Historically, we put some thought, but not as much thought as we should in the president's budget, because when it goes to the Congress, they would make adjustments. They would plus things up, they would decrement things, they would add new items. That option is no longer available in an era of earmark bans, and so we're putting a lot more scrutiny in how we take all of our business lines, whether it's navigation, aquatic ecosystem, flood risk reduction, how we prioritize those dollars. So it's really been a fundamental shift in who makes the choices on where investments are made. Marine infrastructure work is enormous job creation engine, craft jobs, American materials and equipment, contractors, all of which grow our economy. 99.6% of U.S. overseas trade by volume moves through U.S. ports. 66% of U.S. overseas trade value moves through U.S. seaports. For every $1 billion in exports shipped through seaports, 15,000 U.S. jobs are created. The new Panama Canal locks will be a game changer for global shipping. The existing locks constrain ship traffic to 38 feet. The new locks will pass ships with a 50-foot draft. On the Atlantic and Gulf coasts, we will have 10 port cities ready to take partial advantage of these deeper ships, but only 3 ready to take full advantage of the 50-foot ships. We are not providing the level of channel maintenance ports and shippers expect. The Corps has the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. I believe Kurt Nagel from AAPA talked to you about this morning. It's an ad valorem tax paid on the value of cargo. The tragedy in this is it collects about $1.4 billion a year in tax. We get a little over half of that back actually to do the maintenance for the ports. The rest goes into the General Treasury Fund and is used to just offset the deficit. You may have heard about the Realize America's Maritime Promise proposal. It's called the RAMP Act. Or the RAMP Bill. This effort seeks to align coastal navigation with highways and aviation trust funds. Basically, it says Congress will appropriate the prior year's Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund receipts. Right now, the trust fund has grown to over $6 billion, but we have not gotten access to that to maintain the ports. It has tremendous congressional support, the RAMP Act, with over 175 congressional sponsors in the House and 34 in the Senate. If you're so inclined, you can learn more about it by Googling RAMP or HMTF. Navigation stakeholders have made their voices heard in Washington. We thank you for your support of the navigation program. In the post-earmark world, Congress has found an approach to provide additional funds. Since they can't earmark what they did, they gave us $507 million, and then they gave us 26 pots and criteria and asked us to make choices based upon performance-based budgeting of how that money was to be distributed. The navigation portion of that was $149 million in 4 distinct pots. One was navigation maintenance for $34 million, deep draft navigation $55 million, inland navigation $30 million, and shallow, remote, and subsistence navigation $30 million. Freight movement initiatives with Department of Transportation. The Corps has navigation channels and inland navigation locks. Department of Transportation has roads and rails. We're working on increased collaboration of freight movement with the Department of Transportation. A milestone was Corps' participation in reviewing the DOT Tiger grants applications that involved maritime infrastructure. I guess we've been trying to collaborate closer with DOT, and I guess my big aha moment about 2 years ago was there is no national freight strategy. The assumption has been is that cargo will magically appear at our ports, and then we have a transportation system that's designed to move it once it gets to the United States, but it's not really looking at the complete intermodal system. We're also U.S. Ports and Inland Waterways Modernization Strategy. This is a congressionally directed study that gave us 180 days in the 12 appropriations, but there's no permanent policy with respect to channel improvements. Congress is taking the first step by tasking the Corps' Institute for Water Resources with preparing a report on how Congress should consider addressing the critical needs for port and inland waterways. There's also language in the 13 budget establishing a White House navigation task force. We're putting the meat on the bones of that right now and going to be making a proposal to OMB on how we can better collaborate with the other federal agencies and the ports and the industry to better align federal investments with the needs of the nation. Bottom line, I guess in summary, America is a maritime nation. It's about economy, jobs, and exports. These are essential job creators for your city's well-being. You have a tremendous opportunity to collectively make this point in Washington. I'm looking forward to the outcome of this meeting. We in the Corps want to help you advance the goals of a vibrant, economically healthy city. That's all I have for prepared remarks, and I'd be glad to take any questions you might have.
Great, thank you, Stephen. We have questions. Mayor. Oh, here.
Thank you. Mr. Stockton, you'd mentioned that Highway Maintenance Trust Fund and that balance there, that $6 billion. What can we do to free up that money? I mean, we know that it's there. We know kind of how they've been using it, but what can we do to free up those funds to help us do some of the stuff that we're talking about today? And what can we do moving forward to lockbox those revenues that are going to be generated in the future so that they don't just keep adding to that balance that we have there, but actually put those dollars to work? Do you have any advice for us on that?
I think the legislation that I referenced that's now in the House and the Senate, it really is, I think the proposers of that legislation, from AAPA to the Dredging Contractors of America, I think they've given up on the $6 billion that's already been collected. What they want to do is change it to a situation that whatever's collected in the previous year would actually flow to us for doing maintenance dredging. So it would increase it from about the $700 to $800 million range this year to about $1.4 billion a year, which would allow us to maintain full channel width and dimensions in a lot more of the ports we're responsible for. I think we're responsible for something like 900 different channels and ports. We maintain about 59 actively, none of those to full depth and width.
I think that's Mary Hayes over there. We can barely see you out here, but Mary Hayes. Steve, you want to turn your microphone?
Yeah, I guess we've got to coordinate these mics. Red lights are on, and communication is needed with a little volume. But thank you very much. We appreciate the Corps. We have a local Corps office in Little Rock, my city across the river, North Little Rock. I don't know if you were here a little earlier when I commented on, the busiest stretch of the interstate system, either that or the second busiest, connects my city, North Little Rock, where Interstate 30 dead ends into Interstate 40. And so that connection between 30 and Memphis is probably one of the most congested. And obviously, overland Union Pacific Railroad comes over with piggyback cargo, goes to Marion, Arkansas, which is close to Memphis. And then actually a lot of that piggyback freight, goes through our city and then is unloaded in Marion and comes back on the interstate. I use that, as where we are now in terms of distribution of our freight, multimodal freight system, as we look to the next century, or next half century, when we're going to hit, about 500 million people about the middle part of this century. It just doesn't seem like it takes too much rocket science to recognize that our waterways and our rail ways need to, be a part of the future plan in terms of moving freight. You could go down the Arkansas, hang a left, and get over to the Memphis area, but obviously it'd take a little bit longer. I guess what I'm asking is, have you worked toward understanding the recognition that our system, in order to accommodate its growth and certainly accommodate, the increase in population, has got to utilize water and rail a whole lot more than it ever has in the past? And is that recognition being communicated in a way that, that underlines how, one of the things and I'll be real quick on this, we're talking about building a new bridge between Little Rock and North Little Rock. We discussed this a few minutes ago, and the bridge is supposed to cost somewhere around $50 million. We were presented with a quantification because we've got 3 connections between Little Rock and North Little Rock, 3 bridges, one of which is going to have to be torn down at the same time another's built at the same place. So we're going to have to go from 3 to 2 bridges. What that means, is that roughly $40 million worth of congestion costs are going to add to our local economy's pocketbook, and disruption of wear and tear on vehicles, disruption of time, all those other things that go along with that kind of a burden. So congestion cost, I guess, is what I'm saying. And do we recognize, how much of a dead-end road we're moving toward without having these alternative avenues of transportation, water and rail, invested in the way that they need to be? Oh.
I think in my remarks I mentioned that there is no kind of intermodal national freight strategy. I think it's been looked at as the railroads are private. The model for financing the Department of Transportation has had is we will give grants to the states based on formulas, and the states will know best. And then the ports have just been pretty much left out there. I think what is really needed is a national integrated intermodal freight strategy that really looks at the system, because right now we don't have a system. We have pieces of a system that all pretty much function independently. And so I think there's room to do a lot of work there. Deputy Secretary of Transportation, John Pocari, I think he gets it. He's somebody you may want to mention when you, or may want to meet with when you go to Washington, because his comment really strikes a chord with me. It's leave it on the water as long as possible. It's the most environmentally friendly, economical mode of transportation. And to the extent that you can leave it on the water as long as possible, I think it allows us to reduce transportation costs and to make our exports more competitive in a global marketplace.
Doing it to myself. I'm Christopher Cabaldon. I'm the mayor of West Sacramento, in the Port of West Sacramento. And first I want to say thanks. The Corps has been a terrific partner through some difficult challenges, not just with our own port, but throughout the country. And your participation in the Tiger program really did pay some significant dividends. As you know, we are implementing now a marine highway project that will allow cargo to stay on the water from Oakland and San Francisco ports deeper into the valley. But what I want to ask you is we're definitely under-competing with the rest of the world in terms of our resources in being invested into ports, but we're also under-efficient compared to the rest of the world. And Mayor Marks, if he gets the microphone, will remind us all that there's a port in China built in 7 years, an entire port built in just 6 years? 6 years, it's the 7th largest port in the world. Mayor Foster sitting next to you will remind us that a town of 30,000 became a mega city of 12 million in 20 years with those levels of investment. I'm trying to complete a little tiny channel deepening, and I think we got our congressional authorization in the late 80s. It's 2012. The process and and the amount of time and studies that we take to make sure that we absolutely never make a wrong infrastructure investment. Seems like we've weighted that process so heavily against not ever spending anything on not exactly the best possible project that sometimes we're not building anything. So is the Corps and some of your other partners looking at ways to streamline the processes that are involved in spending the precious resources that we do have for navigation projects?
Yes. No. There's a lot of contributors to the frustration, and that's why I'm frustrated. We have about $60 billion in authorized projects. We get about $2 billion a year that $60 billion group gets to compete for new construction and construction general. So needs are many, resources are few. To get to the point of getting a project authorized can be very long and frustrating. We have undertaken over the last year and a half a planning transformation. Over time, our analysis and reports got bigger and bigger and longer. It's not uncommon to see a report 4 feet high. And so we've just issued guidance last month. This is a takeoff of Herman Cain. It's not a 999 plan. It's a 333. It's 3 years max, $3 million max, and integrated with all 3 levels of the organization to expedite it. And I added my 4th 3, which is 3-inch thick report. And a lot of this just gets to over time. You want to make sure your report will pass the tests at Office of Management and Budget and the Secretary's office, and people want to be able to answer all the questions, and they do all the analysis, they do all the explorations, they do all the NEPA analysis. And it's gotten to the point where we just have to say, stop the insanity, let's get back to basics. We want a rigorous evaluation to make federal investments, but we think we can do that in 3 years, $3 million. Or I should say some, because of their complexity, are going to be more than that, but they have to come back to headquarters and pass through a sieve, and we don't expect to grant many exceptions to that. So we're really trying to make investment recommendations to the administration and Congress and get through the process much quicker.
Any other questions? I have a question. You mentioned, and you weren't here this morning, but it was brought up several times about a national plan. You specifically mentioned a national freight plan, I think is how you put it. I guess my question is, where does that come from? I mean, the Corps seems to have a very specific charge, and you build levees and dredge things, and you do some very specific things. You say $60 billion in projects. Department of Transportation focuses on getting people from point A to point B. Commerce is a much larger. Where are these plans? And I'm just asking for your ideas as to because maybe it's not from any one of these or all of these or whatever. How do we get to the point where we can create one of these national plans? What's your best idea?
As I mentioned in my remarks, I think there is a need for a national freight strategy, and it needs to be multimodal. It can't just look at one mode of transportation. And so we are currently working with Department of Transportation to better integrate our investments with their investments. But, frankly, it came as a shock to me that there was no national freight strategy for how we move goods internationally and within the United States. So I think that's a real need. Now, that would be Department of Transportation lead, but we would be a contributor because of the ports piece. Now I think OMB actually has recognized the need for that too, and in the 13 budget proposed setting up this White House navigation task force, which would be a shorter term effort to develop a strategy for how we manage and develop the nation's port system, which would be probably a subset of that national freight strategy. But I think there's a huge need for it. I think Department of Transportation should be the lead agency in that. We should be a contributor.
Okay, let's take and I want to follow up on that a little bit, but let's take a short little break and turn back over to Mayor Brown. We have a special guest here. Mayor?
I just want to say thank you, Mr. Vice President. We have a special guest, and it's Shad Khan, who is the new owner of the Jaguars. We'll stand. The new owners of the Jaguars. And I want to say a little bit about him. Thank you so much. Here's someone who's living the American dream, Tom Cochran. He came, and I just learned one new thing, that his father is not only his mentor, but sold everything he could to give him a one-way ticket to this country. He goes to Illinois, sleeps in a Y for a few dollars every night, puts himself to college, graduates, and launched a business, which is now $3.5 billion corporation. Nobody gave it to him. He earned it. He worked hard. He believed in the American dream. And now he's the new owner of the Jaguars, the sole owner of the Jaguars, and I'm so proud of his vision. And part of it is, you need to know, he got his start in Jacksonville here at the port. The port played a major role in his business. But he wants Jacksonville to play an NFL game every year abroad and have the hottest NFL ticket in the country. But more importantly, he believes in economic development. He believes that the private sector is the engine, and he knows that all the mayors, all you all here from around the country. Let's welcome the owner of the Jaguars. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Brown. I think it's absolutely a privilege for me to be here and see all of you. And if you're wondering how powerful Jacksonville is, a couple of months ago, I pulled up with a rowboat right up here. And I don't know what's in the water. You saw what the thing turned into. So, but you know, I came here in Jacksonville selling parts door to door, literally over to Toyota dealership, because even though I spent my life in Illinois, a lot of different reasons, Detroit, we weren't big enough for them, and really, so I got a huge break here, which propelled me, you know, over the last 20 years to sell parts globally. So I have a huge amount of affection, obviously, for Jacksonville, and then obviously love for football, which fate, destiny, kismet brought me to Jacksonville. And I had the privilege of obviously meeting Mayor Brown, and I think we're absolutely blessed with his leadership, who absolutely gets it. And I've known obviously our mayor in Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, who's absolutely a benchmark guy I think this country needs, and Mayor Brown is right there up with him. So it's really absolutely a privilege to know you, and I think it's Jacksonville couldn't be more prouder of Mayor Brown and everything he's doing to really propel us and get us the economic viability so we can be viable here as an NFL team. So thank you.
One thing I wanted to say,
Yeah.
just to ask you, can you give your sense, where this conference is on, there's a national meeting
Yeah.
On ports and exports.
Yeah.
Can you, and we're talking about
Yeah.
that, can you give your, just a couple of minutes on what you think about how important ports and exports is for the
Absolutely.
economy?
I think, let me just share a quick anecdote. I mean, literally last 5 days, you know, I've gone around the globe. I was in London on Monday, Stuttgart on Tuesday, and I'm just literally a couple hours ago, I got off the plane from Japan. So I was at Toyota. Really, I mean, in a global economy, everything moves, okay? Money moves, people moves, ideas move. What is the strategic advantage a country has or a city has? I mean, there's only one thing that doesn't move, and it's the infrastructure. Ports, the vitality really around that is absolutely a critical element. And I believe that, you know, we're going through a huge global realignment for America, which is, I think, the golden age of America is upon us, and the best years are really right ahead of us. With you know, the U.S. dollar, a lot of amazing amount of things are going on, and I could bore you for hours why it's going to happen.
That's our job, to bore them for hours. We do a very good job of that, by the way.
So I think with that, you know, it's going to be the infrastructure that's going to be attracting the jobs and the businesses globally, because companies need to be closer to the customers. They need to produce product quicker. I think a good thing, frankly, is the weak dollar, because it's going to bring a lot of the jobs back and also give us a platform to export from here. So the ports and the infrastructure is going to be the key competitive weapon, I think, next to education. We don't have those, we're not going to be able to compete. I mean, as simple as that. So.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you so
Thank
Mr. Stockton, I'm sorry if you owned an NFL team, we wouldn't interrupt you with that. But I'd like to go on to a second part of that. And I appreciate the fact that we have the Department of Transportation and we've experienced that the different departments are working together more. But once again, my experience with even the DOT is that they're focused on point A to point B, and that commerce and the economic impact has not played as great a role in those decisions and that planning as they will have to if you do things like freight studies, because that's basically economically driven rather than the primary being the transportation. You can't separate the two. How is the atmosphere in Washington changing that would allow us to be able to really integrate those two areas and get it to the point where we can actually come up with something that creates a transportation plan that is economically driven? Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense. I think there is, you know, notwithstanding the dysfunction in the Congress, I think there's, because of the austerity and reduced budgets, it's forcing agencies to work closer together because nobody has enough resources to do it all alone. So I think there's a lot of impetus for interagency collaboration to come up with kind of cross jurisdictional solutions. And so I think the time is right, and OMB is supportive of the navigation and transportation piece, and they've really, and typically OMB is the place where all good ideas go to die. And so it's refreshing to see them actually encouraging the agencies to work together. But I think that, the White House and the administration really needs to hear from you all that is something that's needed. It's more than just transportation efficiencies. It really has to do with what is our freight strategy within the United States, because it's heavily affected by transportation and commerce, and it needs to be done. So I think your encouragement would help get it done.
Yeah, go right ahead, Craig.
Hi, Craig John, Port of Los Angeles. Just a quick question, if I may, Stephen, is that with the recent lawsuits between Savannah and Charleston over money that I believe was awarded by the Corps, do you think that'll impact future allocations of money on other cities, or do you think that'll change how money is allocated for such things as dredging?
I think that dispute really is an anomaly just between Georgia and South Carolina. I don't think it'll affect other things. Both of those are very, very contentious politically, I guess, but I don't see it affecting other things in the United States.
Any more questions for Mr. Stockton? Stephen, thank you so very much for being here. Thank you. We'd like to give the opportunity, Mr. Brown, I don't mean to sneak up on you like this, but we do have a representative from the largest port in the country, Mr. Steve Brown from the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. You want to weigh in as to, I mean, you've been listening to how a lot of this stuff, all this talk and everything, give us your insight and anything you might add to this.
Thank you. First of all, I wonder how my colleagues in Los Angeles and Long Beach feel about us being leaped over them. They are actually larger than us, but we are the largest port on the East Coast. Right. Right. If you look at the New York Magazine cartoon, you know there's only the East Coast, right? So I appreciate the opportunity to be here and for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey to become part of this conversation. I had prepared some remarks, and if I can just take a couple of minutes, I can voice some common ideas and provide a bit of our perspective, and end with a note on opportunities to develop local metro strategies. So we know that our ports are international gateways through which essential goods are transported to consumers, materials are provided to businesses, and global markets are opened up to American exports. But the efficiency and sustainability of each port is intrinsically dependent on the performance of global logistics chains. And the nation's intermodal networks and corridors, which connect ports with potential exporters, are critical pieces of the chain that help determine the nation's competitive position in the world marketplace. Our port and others are financing expansion of cargo handling capacity and intermodal connections to local and national road and rail networks. But these only touch on the parts of the global logistics chains that local governments and port agencies control. The Port Authority's invested over $600 million to bring on-dock rail to our port terminals, but the value of rail to prospective exporters is dependent on the capacity and cost competitiveness of the national rail freight system, as well as rail's level of service in metro port areas like ours, where freight rail competes with passenger rail. Yard space is constrained, and community concerns are numerous. This past year represented an all-time record for cargo volume at the Port of New York and New Jersey, and as we've heard, most forecasts point towards continued growth in demand. But policy, financing, and strategic support is needed on a national level to allow our ports to meet forecasted demand and to help this country's industry successfully compete. A national freight strategy is essential for the country to get the maximum economic benefit from its gateway ports efficiently and sustainably. Federal plans, policies, and funding partnerships are needed to reinforce the port investments that make the most sense and guide inland network investments and operations for mutual support. A public purpose vision is especially important for freight transportation, where private capital and business decisions drive investment, and freight logistics much more so than for highways and for transit. Recent Surface Transportation Act created a more integrated, multimodal federal program from the earlier interstate highway and public transit statutes. As a strategic next step toward integrated system management, the Port Authority supports efforts to introduce a significant emphasis on freight transportation in the new surface transportation legislation. Incorporating freight provisions in the new statute would provide the best assurance that important freight projects and corridors would have access to federal funding, and that freight needs would advance in coordination with other transportation policy objectives. In particular, Senators Lautenberg, Murray, and Cantwell's Freight Act proposed establishing a national freight policy, a federal office of freight planning and development, and a new multimodal competitive merit-based grant program specifically for freight projects. Other important elements of new surface transportation reauthorization could include project eligibility for intermodal rail and waterborne freight infrastructure, and the program should allow funding for road and highway intermodal connectors that improve ground access to ports and intermodal terminals. A federal freight policy agenda should include funding mechanisms and policy tools to promote preservation and development of freight service to and from the metropolitan areas. The new law should explicitly recognize a federal role in ensuring that the national freight network continues to provide direct access to urban markets. Consideration should be given to focusing any new capital investment tax credits for Class I railroads on metropolitan areas, as well as coordination of passenger and freight rail planning. The legislation should ensure that initiatives to promote high-speed passenger rail service protect freight capacity. It also should provide policy and funding support for capacity enhancements to alleviate passenger freight conflicts. And the legislation should provide policy and funding support for expanding waterborne movement of international and domestic freight within and between regions. And let us not forget our marine channels. They're sort of the waterside driveways to our ports. We need to maintain commitments for funding harbor navigation requirements. As mentioned before, the Port Authority also is very concerned that full federal funding is given to harbor deepening projects such as the one going on now at the Port of New York and New Jersey, and supporting measures to ensure annual revenues into the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund are, and that they're used for their intended purpose of operation and maintenance of ports and harbors. So as local, state, and national transportation organizations increasingly struggle with insufficient funds to meet the nation's growing transportation dilemma, it's becoming clear that neither traditional formula funding nor innovative financing alone can meet the mobility challenge. Reliable core funding, expanded public-private partnerships, and support for regional collaborations are the key ingredients for achieving expanded investments that delivers improved performance. And finally, with these policy and finance tools in place, local officials can partner with the shippers and local business to build community support for smart freight strategies that create local jobs and support growth nationally. Thank you.
I love this little cat and mouse. Thank you very much. Thanks, Steve. By the way, you know, if you make it there, you can make it anywhere, so keep going.
I thought it was inappropriate to mention the Giants after the Jaguars spoke. But yes, you can make it there.
It probably was, but that's never stopped us in this group, so don't worry about it. Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Brown, or any comments or anything else? Okay. All righty, we got up done a little bit early here, so we're gonna take a 15-minute break, but please, let's make it 15, so that means in 10 minutes, start planning on coming on back so we can get started with our next segment right at 2 o'clock. We'll get going. Thank you.